So your way of feeling lonely, why you feel lonely sometimes, it is a survival mechanism within your own self that is trying to reach out to people, that is trying to feel part of, that is yearning for something. That perception, that cognitive bias, that biasness that you've surrounded yourself with that has become your reality limits you from creating those kind of relationships, because your personality of how you are and who you are sometimes determines the kind of social circle that you build. One of the hardest questions for people to admit to is the feeling of loneliness. Have you ever felt alone? You feel no one cares, no one sees you, no one checks up on you, no one wants to see you in their circle. You have nobody to turn to. People do not know who you are, but you feel like you're full of potential. You feel like you're a good person. You feel like you can give so much in the world, but yet again, the world is not allowing you to give that to them. Well, I can say to you one thing is that you are not alone. In the UK, over 33 million people feel lonely or have had the feeling of loneliness. In the US, over 52% of people are lonely or have had the feeling of loneliness. But the biggest question we have to ask ourselves is why? In the world whereby there are so many people, in the world whereby we live with billions and millions of people, why do we still feel so lonely? Well, in the words of Akao, he says, loneliness does not come from having no people, but from being unable to communicate the things that feel important. I read a comment on YouTube that said, the worst part of loneliness is when you watch a movie and want to share your opinion with someone, but you have nobody and you end up talking to yourself. Well, I have done countless research online, watched so many YouTube videos, but most of them, they only tell you signs of loneliness, how to tell that you are lonely. But they miss out a crucial part of why you are lonely. How do you get to the point of being lonely? What is loneliness? What causes loneliness? Why is it over 33 million people in the UK experience loneliness or have loneliness? So in my research, I looked at the psychological point of view. I wanted to understand psychologically why, people feel lonely, or why sometimes you have the feeling of loneliness. Now, I'm just going to say that there is a difference with being lonely and being alone. Being alone is different from being lonely. Being lonely is a state of mind. Being alone is a choice. So something to do with loneliness is an evolutionary perspective. Now, if we go back to the ancient world, our evolutionary history, loneliness is not a modern phenomenon. Loneliness is not something that just started in the 2000s or the 90s or the 80s or the 60s. Loneliness is something that has started way back in our ancestral being. It shows you that it's partly ingrained in our human nature. Long time ago, in the ancestral societies, exclusion from a society meant harsh consequences, reducing an individual's rate of survival will result into being alone, starving, and then leading to death. As a result, loneliness may have evolved as a signal to motivate us to seek social connections. The distressing experience of loneliness dates back to the distressing ancient ways in which the forefathers lived, lived as a society. Because of that, in the society we live now, it has created a mechanism in which we seek protection from others, bond with others, seek resources from others, and emotionally rely on others. Because of that kind of way of living, community was a very important thing, and if you were not part of a community, you ended up living on your own because it was survival based on the community. So your way of feeling lonely, why you feel lonely sometimes, it is a survival mechanism within your own self that is trying to reach out to people, that is trying to feel part of, that is yearning for something, in order to feel part of, in order to feel included in a community. And when you're seeking that out and you're not finding it, it excludes you. That's why you end up being on your own and feeling that loneliness. That's why you're in a group of so many people, but then you feel so much alone because you don't feel like you've been invited into that kind of community. Let's look at the attachment theory. The attachment theory was introduced by John Bowlby. This particular theory of attachment style goes back to our early relationships with our caregivers when we were growing up as children. The type of care that was given to us by our caregivers determines our attachment styles, and because of those attachment styles, it determines how we connect with people and how we disconnect with people. For example, there are two prominent types of attachment styles. These styles greatly impact our adulthood. These styles greatly determine how we maintain and relate to relationships, which have a big part in leading us to loneliness or feeling lonely. For example, individuals with secure attachment styles have an easier way of developing, connections and meaningful relationships compared to people with insecure attachment styles, which makes it hard for them to sustain and establish meaningful relationships. So such individuals are at a higher risk of feeling lonely based on the attachment styles that you have. I urge you to read about attachment style so you can understand what your attachment style is. And if not, let me know. I'll make a video on attachment style. How your caregiver was available, not available, too much available, has created some kind of attachment that you have towards your adulthood and towards the relationships that you form. That is why some people can end up being in relationships but end up being alone, because in the world that we live in, sometimes we have to remember there is an aspect of business. The more busy we become, the less we pay attention to the relationships that we build, and at the end of the day, you wake up one morning and you look around and there is nobody with you. There is no one that you can call, or there's nobody you can have a meaningful relationship with yourself, because into the modern world that we live in, there are sort of attachment styles we've created. There are sort of situations and environmental factors that have led us to be the way we are, and that have led us to have that kind of creation or that kind of attachment or that kind of way of living or feeling lonely. In this world that we live in, for example, in the Western world, it is so much corporate. You get on the tube, you get off the tube, you get back home, you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you do the same thing over and over again. Over the weekend, you're either cleaning up, getting ready, and then you start again. So the aspect of loneliness, being especially in a busy city, can create you to be lonely because you are so attached on a routine that excludes a social way of living, and your only connection to social way of living is through the phone or through social media, which we're going to talk about towards the end. So let's talk about a cognitive bias. Now, a cognitive bias is something to do with the bias or the limitation that you've put upon your life, the limitation that you've put upon yourself. It plays a significant role in amplifying the feelings of loneliness. The two major cognitive biases that can make you feel lonely are negative perception and social comparison. If you look at the negative perception, it causes individuals to look at themselves as unlikable people or unworthy of meaningful relationships because of the perception they have put on themselves, the mark that they have put on themselves, or the mark that you've put on yourself. That perception, that cognitive bias, that biasness that you've surrounded yourself with that has become your reality limits you from creating those kind of relationships. Because let's be honest, the feeling of loneliness is to do with relationships and how you relate to other people. Nothing else at all with that, because if we lived in a world whereby those things were not important, then nobody would be lonely or no one would feel lonely. And if we look at the social comparison aspect of the cognitive bias, it leads to the feeling of inadequacy when you start comparing yourself to other people. Because these kind of biases, like the social and the negative perception of yourself, they literally limit you or hinder your ability to form meaningful relationships. And because of those things, you are unable to be in a community or be in a society where you belong or where you feel that you're heard or seen, or taken care of. Therefore, it makes you very perceptive to creating, a community, leading to loneliness. If you look at emotional regulation as another point, effective emotional regulation is key to combating loneliness. Individuals who struggle with emotions of sadness, anxiety, rejection, are prone to avoid any social relations, any social interactions at all, because they are trying as much as they can to avoid social discomfort. Because building relationships with people, you have to be aware that there's going to be sadness, there's going to be anxiety, sometimes there's going to be fear, sometimes there's going to be an one-sided relationship. And people who are prone to sadness, people who are prone to anxiety, if you're prone to all those kind of things, you are going to try to pull away from connecting. So you have a detachment, type of style that you have within yourself. So you run away from connections, you disconnect yourself from people, and in disconnecting yourself from people, you isolate yourself. And when you isolate yourself, you find yourself in that situation whereby you don't have anybody around you, you haven't built any social community, and therefore you are on your own, and then you start feeling lonely, which can even lead into chronic loneliness. Because this kind of social interaction with people, because of that that fear of you feeling sad or anxious, stems from the belief that social interactions will amplify negative emotions. Like you've watched so many, videos or so many movies whereby, you know, girl groups have been, you know, fighting, or you've watched, you know, about friendships, betrayals and all those kind of things. And because you do not want to be that girl that has been betrayed, you don't want to be that person that has been betrayed, you therefore say, in order for me to avoid betrayal, in order for me to avoid any bitchiness or any kind of way of living with people who are not even my family, I'm going to detach. I'm going to just, you know, avoid that, which can limit you from any social opportunities. But the one thing that we always sometimes forget is a personality trait. Your personality of how you are and who you are sometimes determines the kind of social circle that you build. If you deeply look at them, they are not prone to loneliness, and I'm going to tell you why. They often have smaller, meaningful groups and relationships and social circles, which means they seek deep-rooted, you know, kind of way of living, and it's hard for them to be in a situation of loneliness. Yes, they are introverts, but they have built their own circle in which their introvertness is meaningful. If you compare to extroverts, extroverts have thousands of friends, have so many people, but they may still have the experience of loneliness. Because most of those interactions, they lack in-depth meaning. There is nobody who can convince me here that having so many friends, thousands of friends, that you can deeply connect with each one of them. You can't deeply connect with each one of them. There are a few, but because you're an extrovert and you have so many people at large, you struggle with deep meaningfulness, and extroverts are very prone to loneliness. This is why you find individuals that they say, oh my God, he has so many friends, but why is he talking about having any mental issues? Why is he feeling like, you know, he's feeling alone? We have experiences with celebrities. We have seen this so many times over and over again, whereby you find celebrities telling you that I felt alone, I was on tour, I was with people, you know, I was going here and there, I produced albums, you know, people would come up to me, fans, signing, this and that, but in all that, I still felt lonely. Mentally, I was going down and down. This shows you that it doesn't matter how many people you have or thousands of people that you have, you can still be in a situation whereby you feel lonely if you do not create deep, meaningful connections or deep, meaningful ways of living. That comes down to someone's personality trait. Personally, my trait is I'm an introvert. However, I'm extrovert a tiny bit. If you look at me, you'd be like, there is no way you'd be an introvert. But if you look at my life and my pattern and the things that give me joy and happiness, they are very excluded and they are very alone compared to what a normal extrovert would be. Yes, you'd find me on a party. Yes. The very last point I want to talk about is technology and social media. Our digital age right now of technology is very good at creating connections and also disconnecting us as individuals from the real world. While social media platforms and digital communications have the potential to foster any kind of connections or relationship, they can also lead to loneliness when used excessively. These kind of superficial, you know, internet connections can sometimes fail to fill in a void with genuine normal human interactions, leaving us to feel alone and very lonely within our own selves. Social media has been something that has caused a lot of loneliness because in social media, it makes you to compare yourself to other people. You scroll on the internet, you scroll 24 hours, you are, you know, searching, scrolling, you know, doing every kind of thing. And with that, by the time you finish searching and scrolling and, you know, creating all these kind of connections in the superficial world, instead of going out there and, you know, calling up someone and saying, hey, hello, you know, can we meet here to go for a walk, you're spending more time on social media thinking that that would satisfy your void. In other words, it's not going to satisfy your void at all. It's going to make you feel more lonely because you're missing out that human touch and that human connection. That is why you end up feeling lonely and you end up feeling alone. You end up feeling the urge of like, you know what, there is more that I can do and there is more that can happen to me. Anyway, but some of the things I can tell you that if you are in a if you are having this feeling of feeling lonely or you're having some sort of loneliness, for me personally, I'm a Christian, so in most cases I seek out, you know, some sort of way of reading the Bible to reaffirm and you know, sort of energize myself to give me that reassurance of how I feel about myself. Because in most cases when I start to feel lonely, it kind of comes from a perception of what I'm thinking I am, which I'm not. Another thing that I can say to you is that try as much as you can to talk to people, interact with people, have conversations with people, try to build human connections. It's hard, but try as much as you can to challenge yourself every single day. You just say to someone, can we just go and meet with a coffee? Because let me tell you this free of charge, every single person is seeking out to find a new person to fill a certain void in their lives, you know. certain way in their lives or something within themselves. So if you're scared of meeting that person thinking they reject you because they have thousands of friends, no, that same person is also seeking out someone that could be you. Okay, so don't feel afraid to do that. And if yours is very chronic, then please try as much as you can to seek any medical attention. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your support, and do not forget to like, comment and subscribe if you love this video, and leave down a comment and let me know if you've ever had the feeling of loneliness and how you've come out of it. Share so other people can learn from it. Until next time, I remain Lucy. Bye bye.